Five, four, three, two, one. Hi, everybody. This is Rasco and
Connor Nielsen.
What are we talking about today, Connor?
Today we are going to be talking about studio interference and how it relates to movies, and more importantly, mainstream movies, because studio interference is mostly concerned with generally big studio releases.
Yes, indeed. So, studio interference is one of those things where, like, it sucks to have a movie ruined by it. It's always the most demoralizing thing. Because, like, when a movie is just bad, and it's, like, bad only because the script was bad, or the directing was bad, or the performances were bad, that's one thing, and that's easy to just be like, okay, it's a bad movie. But when a movie comes out, and it's, like, panned horribly, and then it turns out that the studio messed with it, and that's why it's bad, that's the worst feeling ever.
It is, and I think that when a movie does very poorly, whether it bombs or it does not work very well on a narrative level at all, and maybe it does well on its opening weekend, and then it subsequently doesn't do well because of bad word of mouth, people do like to dig and find out why something it doesn't work, and quite a bit of times studio interference is thrown around. I think we should probably talk about what studio interference is, but I do want to say that studio interference isn't inherently a bad thing. There's been numerous times where studio interference has helped a film, because I know this is crazy, but studios want their movies to be good so people can come and watch the movie so they can turn a profit on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Rasco, what is studio interference?
So, studio interference is when the studio interferes, essentially. It can manifest itself in many different ways. So, oftentimes, you know, you might have something like the Daredevil director's cut, where it seems like there's some sort of, like, Fox mandate to have, like, a producer go in, have some scenes taken out, the director's cut has those scenes put back in, but the theatrical cut of Daredevil, it's got a lot of stuff has been pulled out of it. Another example would be like the movie Alien, where Fox just couldn't pick a script that they wanted to go with. Like, that movie has so many different so many different ideas for what they wanted that movie to be. And then Alien 3, like, in the middle of filming, they were still doing rewrites. So they were literally rewriting the script while filming the movie. And they had already built sets for a prior script that they wanted to use, but then they decided, no, we're not going to go with this. But we already built the sets, we wasted too much money, so you have to use these sets in the movie.
Right, and that's also similar to what happened with Star Trek The Motion Picture, where they didn't have a finished script, so they were, having new scripts every day, and they were having writers on set throwing stuff around, and they bought special effects for sequences that were now in older scripts that weren't in the new scripts, but they still had to use it because they ordered it, because then you're just wasting money at that point. But that's, I think, is different from studio interference. I think that could play a part in it, but that's also just a studio wanting to make a movie without having pre-production finish. They're just moving forward without having a director who is on top of their deadlines.
No, yeah, that is true. But like I said, like, it's one of the most irritating things, because, like, sometimes studio interference can be a good thing. Like, there have been movies, I'm sure, that have been saved by a decision that was made by some guy who didn't know anything, but was like, hey, do this to, I don't know. Do you have, like, any idea of, like, a specific of that? Like, where, like, it actually made a movie better?
I'm kind of digging around in my mind, but one thing I do want to talk about, and this is an interesting use of studio interference, because I don't think the outcome was very good, but I think the intents and the conceits were not bad. I think were pretty good. It's impossible to really talk about Blade Runner without talking about studio interference, because of the way that theatrical film turned out to be. I don't know if you know anything about the history of the business side of Blade Runner. Do you know anything about it?
I'm familiar with, like, some of the stuff with, like, people wanting there to be, like, the voiceover, stuff like that was kind of, like, fought against and things like that, but I'm not so much the business perspective of it.
Okay, so basically the way it works out, and I'm really waist deep in Blade Runner at this moment, but basically the way it worked out. And so if you watch the 3.5 hour documentary Dangerous Days about the making of Blade Runner, they go over this, but it gets a little convoluted, so I'm going to try to streamline this as much as possible. Basically, they had a project called Dangerous Days, which was eventually called Blade Runner. And then what happened was Michael Dealey was the producer, and he was trying to find funding. The Ladd Company and Warner Brothers. The Ladd Company, the leader was Alan Ladd Jr., and he had actually worked with Ridley Scott prior on Alien, and he was very happy with his experience on Alien, so he was coming back to finance it. So the Ladd Company put up $7 million, and then Warner Brothers put up $7 million. And this was after another company, I think called Filmways, had dropped out after going bankrupt because they were originally going to be financing it, and they had already put in, I think, $2.5 million in pre-production, and they were trying to meet their estimated budget of a little over $21 million. So you have 7 plus 7 plus 2.5, which is $16.5 million, and they're trying to get to 21.5 roughly. So they were really trying to find financing, and they were in pre-production, and they were really, in a what's the cliche? They were really
in a pickle.
Because they were trying to get this. They had a shooting schedule and they had a schedule, but they didn't have all the money yet. So they had Bud Yorkin and Jerry, I want to say Perenchio is how you pronounce his name.
Parmesan.
Gene Parmesan. If you know Arrested Development, you might have gotten that reference. So Gene Parmesan and Bud Yorkin, what they do is they put up the rest of the money, and the way that worked is, and the way they had this whole contract set up that Michael Dealey had set up is that they put up the rest of the money. So they put up $3 million each to get to that estimated budget of $21.5 million. Mm-hmm. And if they went over budget, more and more of the creative decisions on the final cut of the film would fall into their hands. And if you know anything about Blade Runner, you know that movie went crazy over budget. And so Jerry Perenchio and Bud Yorkin, by the end of that project, they had so much creative control over that film. And when you watch Blade Runner, it's a very impenetrable movie. It's a very hard movie. It's not a very accessible movie. I really like Blade Runner. I love it, actually, and I know you love that movie. But I think we can agree it's not a very accessible film.
Oh yeah, you'll show that movie to 10 people, you'll get at least 5 that say, I don't get it.
Oh yeah, and I remember my first exposure to Blade Runner was the final cut.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't think should be.
I want to say I don't know if that's the right way to watch it for the first time, because there are certain contexts and little hints and nods to the world and our character's place in the world that I don't think you really get in the final cut. For example, how are you supposed to know that Gaff is a Blade Runner who's brown-nosing Brian for a job? You really wouldn't know that unless you watch the theatrical cut.
You don't need to know it. Just shut up. Shut up.
I'm just saying there are certain things about the context, like city speak and what that is. Mm-hmm. And yes, that's all. And all of that is in the voiceover in that film. And now, of course, the voiceover really does not work from a storytelling level. It's very choppy. It's overbearing. The voice acting from Harrison Ford is horrible. And I think the ending, the theatrical cut's ending, is one of the worst endings to any movie ever. It makes me want to stab my eyes out because it completely contradicts everything that came before it.
Yeah.
Especially, what for your lifespan? I don't know what you're talking about. All of a sudden, there was information that Tyrell had told Deckard that we never saw, we never even heard of.
Yeah.
But
the worst.
the needless to say, this is too long-winded and longer than I wanted to go on for. But basically, all of that stuff regarding the editing choices and the voice over, all that was from Yorkin and Perenchio because they were watching the movie and thinking about the mainstream appeal and how a first-time viewer would view that movie, and they were thinking about it from an understanding level to the new viewer. And I think on a conceit level, that's not bad. Like, I understand why they chose to go that way, and that is technically not really studio interference, but it is financier interference, which is akin to studio interference.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of cases that, like, we'll never know about, because there's a lot of movies where, like, the studio will demand a rewrite of a script, but no one will be credited for the rewrite. It's just the same person. So, like, this happens with, like, a lot of... Max Landis has talked about this before, so he has rewritten so many scripts that we'll never know what they are because he's not legally allowed to talk about them. But there's a lot of movies that apparently have been very critically well received that he was hired to do a rewrite for, but we'll never know what those movies are because he's legally not allowed to talk about it. Also, if you want to see like a good example of how like how this can happen, look at like Victor Frankenstein. You can read Max Landis's original screenplay for that movie and then watch that movie. And I don't think that movie has any other writers credited. It's just different. And so like this happens all the time where a studio will demand something be different and we won't know because they cannot credit people. They cannot credit writers.
Yeah. I think that's so strange too. And when you want to get like crediting writers, Ben-Hur has one credited writer.
Yeah.
But that writer, I know there were several on-set screenwriters of Ben-Hur that were not credited, and the director, William Wyler, and the main star of that movie, Charlton Heston, were so mad that they didn't get a writing credit. They actually leaked the information to the press that certain writers had been writing very key monologues and dialogue.
Yeah. You know, like... This got me really worried when we were when there was like a few weeks back, because now the new trend is every time there's reshoots, assume the worst.
Yeah, no, there's reshoots for everything.
Yeah, but for some reason, like that's one of those words where like there's so many people that learned what that word was with Suicide Squad. Like that was the first time that anyone had ever like this is me just theorizing, but this has got to be what it was. A lot of people have no idea what reshoots were, have never heard the term before. Or are, not were. Nobody knows what they, like a lot of people don't know what they are. And so then when Suicide Squad, when a bunch of buzz was made about those reshoots, everyone now like writes that term down because that was, for a lot of people, probably the first introduction of that word into their vocabulary. A lot of people on the internet. So they see that and now they go, oh, reshoots, negative connotation, put that in my head. Every time there's reshoots, assume the worst. And so like, tons of like internet outlets have realized that people are really, really like biting, like they're just so ready to like pile onto a movie that has rumored reshoots. And this scared me when like Rogue One, when they were like, oh, Rogue One reshoots happening for Rogue One, and then all these rumors come out like, oh, they're Disney wasn't happy with the final cut of the movie, so they have to refilm 40% and like stuff like that. That's ridiculous. And that was obviously not true, but like that's my worst fear. Like I hate when I hear about how the studio, either afterwards when a movie has already been released or prior, when it's like the studio is actually vocally displeased with something. That is so scary.
And yeah, it is. And I want to talk about this. Studio interference is an interesting thing, because it's really kind of related to the relationship between the studio and the director of a film. Mm-hmm. When we talk about directors, we usually talk about artists like David Fincher, Steven Spielberg, Christopher Nolan, and when we talk about like artist filmmakers, we want to... not necessarily George Lucas.
No, George Lucas is not.
I mean, maybe,
no,
because he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And he usually wants to accomplish his vision, and that's neither here nor there. But we also talk about like James Cameron or
Linklater.
Richard. Oh, I love Richard Linklater. Richard Linklater or David Lynch. Anyways, where I was going with this was those are but usually these directors have their own production houses.
Yeah.
Like Christopher Nolan has Cinecopy, Steven Spielberg has Amblin Entertainment, and many other directors have their own production houses. And when a director gets big enough and they have enough money, they can produce their own films as well as direct them. So they do have that kind of business creative control over their projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the thing is, usually though, when we talk about Christopher Nolan or Quentin Tarantino or David Fincher or other directors of the sorts, they're the exception.
Yeah.
The rule usually follows that a studio has a project. They have a script, Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times a writer will write a spec script. Studio buys the rights to the script and then they want to make a film, or they'll say, some studio guy's like, I want to make a movie about X, Y, or Z. So I'm going to hire a writer to write a movie about that.
Yeah.
And then now that we legally own that script, we can get a director to get on this project. Usually, because when we think of directors, we think, a director wants to tell the story. Yes, but most of the time, a film is just a studio wanting to sell this movie, and they hire a director to oversee the project.
Mm-hmm.
Like a foreman or a superintendent on a project of a construction site. So what they do when they get a director, though, is they sit down with a bunch of directors and they'll ask them what their vision for this film is.
Yeah, they oftentimes do this with writers as well. Like, they'll be like, we're making a Samuel Adams movie. Like, that apparently was at one point actually happening. And, like, they'll have people come in and pitch their ideas. They do the same thing with directors as well.
Yeah, and what'll happen is the directors and the studios and the producers of the studio, they will agree on a vision, and then the director will go out and try to accomplish that vision.
Yeah.
And this is where I want to talk about Fantastic, because that is a very bizarre amalgamation of poor direction and poor studio interference.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Basically, it's just a melting pot of bad. But so when they agree on things, the director tries to accomplish that thing, and maybe studio interference will occur when a studio will see a director doing something that they didn't agree on, they don't like, and they'll say, no, do it this way. This is what we agreed to. This is what we have a contract to do. And I can understand that. I get why a studio would want to interfere in that case. Sometimes, like in Fantastic Four, they'll have a vision for something, and then all of a sudden the studio will just change their mind, and all of a sudden have these new mandates that they want the director to go back and do.
Yeah.
And a lot of times this upsets directors, and that's a lot of times negative studio interference kind of comes from that realm.
Yeah, and it's some like a lot of things. They're like, that's the issue, because you have a lot of people that have no business working in a creative, like, artistic department, but like they are creative execs and stuff like that. You have a lot of people that are not they can, like, writers always talk about how, like, these people that make these decisions that interfere with the project, they think that they're creative. Like, they think that, like, oh, I'm a creative guy, I can come in and tell this director what. Like, they think that they're doing what's right in a lot of cases, but they also think that they also think that whatever they do is the more profitable decision also.
Yeah, a lot of people they'll think, oh, this is the most profitable decision, so it's obviously the most creative decision. My wallet got fatter.
Yeah. Things only make money when they're good, right?
Thank you, Michael Bay, for that 5th Transformers movie.
Yeah, bad movies don't make a lot of money. We all know this. This is fact.
Yeah, and I mean, of course there are exceptions, but this has really been, I mean, this will probably date this conversation, but we're in the summer of 2016, and this has been the summer of disappointing movies. And that, this is, of course, or at least financially disappointing films. And this, of course, can be attributed to just the, we can have a different discussion about the market size and just how releasing 3 blockbusters in a single weekend is not a good idea. Or, having 3 blockbusters 3 weeks in a row in the summertime probably isn't a good idea. But I think a lot of the time studio interference that has a negative response on the box office and will, tank a film like Fant4stick will end a career, and that'll usually fall on the director or whoever the studio wants it to fall on. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the BFG, a movie I really like, bombed. It didn't. That movie cost $160 million. It didn't even make. I don't even think it made $20 million on its opening weekend. That movie tanked, which is unfortunate because I really liked that movie. But the thing is, that's not going to ruin Steven Spielberg's career. He's Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
He's going to make Ready Player One. Like, the last family movie that Steven Spielberg made was The Adventures of Tintin. Mm-hmm. That movie wasn't a bomb, but it didn't do very well financially, as, say, other animated films. What came out in 2011 for Pixar, it was before Brave. I want to say Cars 2. Yeah, it was the same as Cars 2. Cars 2 is not a good movie, but it made a lot of money. It was not a financial disappointment. Adventures of Tintin cost a lot of money. It made a decent, internationally speaking, it made a decent penny, but it was, not as much as they thought it would be. And this is like 2 times in a row where Steven Spielberg has made family entertainment, and it's been financially disappointing, but he's still Steven Spielberg. Nobody cares. With somebody like, for example, Josh Trank, who made a very good independent film that was distributed by a major studio with Chronicle, and that led to Max Landis and Josh Trank getting Fox contracts. Now they're at the will of Fox. Mm-hmm. And now I think watching kind of the progression of Josh Trank and Max Landis has been very interesting, and just seeing how those minds have gotten frustrated by the going from something like Chronicle, where they had a lot of creative control, to something where, they're being controlled by the people upstairs.
Yeah, and those names oftentimes come up because they're the most vocal about their frustrations with the studio system. Josh Trank straight up just kind of like called out Fox after Fantastic Four came out, and he was like, "A year ago I had a great version of this movie," and then I forget what else he said, but
the critics would have loved it.
Yeah, I think that, that's the thing where, I don't think that there ever was a good version of that film, because outside of things that are just pulled out of the movie, there's a lot there that is horrible. And I'm going to be making a very long video about that movie at some point someday, but in the near future, actually. But with Josh Trank, he kind of ruined his career, though, with his reaction to the poor reception of that movie.
Yeah, he did, but at the same time, his career was already going up in flames during the production of that movie.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the the production of Fant4stick and just how miserable it was?
Well, I the only thing I know that it seems like with the reshoots they didn't even try, because you can literally point at the scenes that are reshoots in that movie when you're watching it.
Because Kate Mara has a wig?
Yeah, and isn't Josh Trank reportedly drunk on set multiple times and stuff like that?
Yeah, there was that, but one thing that was really interesting was Josh Trank, Fox, they agreed on a vision for the film. I think at one point Fox really they changed their mind. They didn't necessarily like what was, getting delivered to them, which I think is what Josh Trank was delivering, what they had agreed on. Which is more of this weird body horror science fiction film, as opposed to a superhero film. And say what you will, we can argue the merits of how good or bad that turned out to be. I think there's one scene in particular that's actually all right as far as that's concerned.
Yeah.
But most of it is pretty boringly filmed. I think Josh Trank is actually at his best when he's filming just actors talking, but because he's really good with actors, I think. But there's that. I think what happened was the studio wasn't liking what they were getting, so they changed their mind on their vision. And then Josh Trank was getting very frustrated about this because, this isn't an I think, this is really what happened. So they had a script ready to go, And then Fox just saw 3 big action scenes in the script and said, well, we're going to cut these out because we don't want to spend the money on that. So Josh Trank is already very upset about what happened. You know, just going into just first day of shooting, you basically don't have a finished script because 3 big set pieces have just been removed, and everything leading up to that and, you know, the fallout of those scenes are completely useless now because they don't lead up to or resolve anything.
Yeah, and one of them is partially filmed, and they just use it in a different way in the movies. Like when The Thing does the thing where he flies out of the plane and like hits the tanks and is like destroying all that stuff.
Yeah. That's just so much
you see
footage.
like what they have of that in the movie, but they use it as like news footage or something like that.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. That's so funny to me.
And like that was like promoted in the trailers and stuff.
Yeah, and that's, oh my god, that's absurd. That's so ridiculous.
I shouldn't say in stuff. I should just say it was promoted in the trailers. That's a Nice Guys reference. I love the Nice Guys. Speaking of great movies that were financial disappointments, but in terms of Fantastic Four, I know that what's his face Trank had acquired an Academy Award-winning special effects supervisor to be on that movie, and Fox just fired that person because they didn't want to spend the money on him. And then after he had been fired, Josh Trank found out, like, I don't know, a couple days to a week later. So now he doesn't have his supervisor, his special effects supervisor, because Fox changed their mind on him. So that's why the special effects look stupid in that movie.
Yeah. Like the morphing face? Are you telling me the morphing face looks stupid? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Watching Reed Richards punch somebody with his elastic arms is the funniest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Like I walked into that movie wanting to love it. I just reactionally just gut busted, laughed at just him punching Doctor Doom with his long arms. It's hilarious. And Morpho face is the funniest thing ever. But what ended up happening later was he, lost his mind and got really, really upset. And what happened was they basically just kicked him off the set, had a new director stand in for him, and just workmanly worked out, these reshot scenes for the third act, completely changed the third act, shot that, and then kicked him out of the editing room, and then just chopped up what we saw on screen.
Yeah, and it really sounds like... Okay, you can tell because, like, I have a theory that, like, literally someone, like, some suit at Fox, like, rewrote the ending of that film himself, and they didn't even hire a writer. Like, a bunch of guys, like, a bunch of producers or something got in a room, they're like, okay, we can write the ending of a movie. Because there is no way that a line like this makes into a movie. There is no victor. Only doom. No one writes that. Nobody writes that and goes, this is a great line. This is yes.
Well, Rasco, I'm sad you don't like that. Because I think that's fantastic.
Wait, what did you just say?
I said, I think that sounds fantastic.
Oh my god. Oh boy.
I hate that ending so much.
I know, that's actually the worst ending to a superhero movie ever, I think. Like that ending, like, conversation. Like, that's the worst ending to a superhero film ever, right?
Yeah.
Because you ripped off, because they did the same thing that Avengers Age of Ultron did. They probably didn't rip it off because they probably had that, like, it's too late in the process. They probably didn't even know that that's how the Avengers Age of Ultron was going to end. But after the fact, it comes off as you ripping it off. Yeah, it comes off as they're ripping it off, but also it's like, isn't it clever? Ooh, he's gonna come up with a name! And it's like, oh my god, isn't it clever, guys? Isn't it clever? Like, come on! And then, boom! Fantastic Four, like, pops up in big text and has, like, this, like, epic music. Yeah! Fantastic Four! And, like, if you're in the audience, you're just like, oh god, no.
Help, I've fallen and can't get up.
It's just bad. Like, oh. We just got off on a Fantastic Four rant for like no reason.
we did, but yeah, I think in the case of like Josh Trank, that's a very extreme case of studio interference. But I know Alien 3 also had that. Do you want to talk about that at all? At least David Fincher's experience.
I mean, it sounded like the worst experience you could possibly have, because you come into a project. I mentioned this earlier. You come into a project. Okay, here is 5 different scripts that have been written. We're not using any of these, but we've already built the sets for some of them, so you have to use these sets. Okay, then they have a script that they're going with for Alien 3. Oh no, we need you to rewrite this script in the process of filming the movie. So he's literally rewriting the script while he is directing the film, like on the day of. Like, this is like that rumor that like George Lucas wrote the conveyor belt scene in Attack of the Clones on his way to filming. You ever heard that?
I have. It's like Rob Liefeld inking on his car ride to the DC offices.
Yeah, no, it's like he's like on it. Like, that sounds like the worst thing ever, right? And that's like so ridiculous because you had so many different versions of the script and none of them sounded very satisfactory. But then also like that's such an irritating thing when it's like the studio is like, we have this date, no matter what, this is when we're starting shooting, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh God, like, it's understandable that they had to start when they had to start, okay? But to like demand a director to rewrite the script while on set, that's so ridiculous. And like, you have to know that and what's crazy about it is that then, after the movie was made, a lot of people don't know this. If you have seen Alien 3 and you hate it, you've probably seen the theatrical cut. There's another cut of the movie called the assembly cut, and it's one of the most, it's almost, I don't want to say night and day, but it's like on the level of like the Daredevil director's cut, and like Superman 2, stuff like that. Like, it's on that level of how different it is from the theatrical cut. It's such a better movie. And I think if the assembly cut was what was released, people wouldn't have such a horrible, like, there are a couple things in Alien 3 that no matter which cut of the movie you're watching, you're just like, oh my God, like, Newt being dead, Hicks being dead, like, all of that is like such a gut punch if you like Aliens. But like, still, regardless, if you're doing a horribly tragic story like that, the assembly cut is a much better attempt at it than the theatrical cut. So it's like they mess with the movie in production. Then in post-production, they messed with the movie even more and made it even worse than it already was. Go watch the assembly cut, everybody. Go watch it. It's actually kind of good, in my opinion. Yeah.
I've never seen Alien 3, so I should probably watch the theatrical cut and then immediately watch the assembly cut.
Yeah, well, you're gonna cry, Connor. You're ready to cry. It's actually maybe the most depressing movie ever made.
Sorry, Schindler's List. You have to take a backseat to Alien 3.
No, it does. Alien 3 is legitimately one of the most depressing movies that exists. Not like, and I don't mean like it's so bad it's depressing. I mean like, it's depressing. Like, what it's about. It's just a depressing movie.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting when you talk about that, because that's another extreme case where a lot of the times a studio will have a set or they don't have a set, and there are these sort of limitations that a director has to work with. And a lot of them, not a lot of that, but there are, cases where that works to people's advantage. Mm-hmm. Where, oh no, our set just got drenched down and we can't use it. We have to work around the limitations because we have to film the scene today. And then, I mean, I can't think of something off the top of my head, but I know there are like a lot of very famous film sequences that are done just off the fly. I know the film Yankee Doodle Dandy, like half of that was filmed on the fly, which is crazy when you watch that movie because of how well it flows.
Like, here's an awesome story about like a time where like someone stuck it to the man and didn't let him mess with their movie. So when Alien was coming out, Ridley Scott, when Alien was being made, Ridley Scott was like, we have to do the scene where we reveal the space jockey in his space jockey chair in the ship. We have to do this. And the studio was like, no, we that's too expensive. We can't build this giant room with a giant skeleton chair gun thing. We can't do that. That's going to cost too much. We'll just do like a footprint and like a skeleton, and that'll be it. That's what you get. You get this little skeleton and you get a footprint, and that will replace the space jockey. And Ridley Scott was like, no. And like, that's one of the things, like, Ridley Scott sounds like he's probably someone that's really hard to work with, but like,
oh yeah,
I like it because like, I want almost all the movies where Ridley Scott didn't have as much control as he typically does with his like more like highly regarded classic movies, except for Blade Runner. You can't say it about Blade Runner, but like with Alien, with like The Martian, and then with like Prometheus, though, the difference between Prometheus and The Martian and Alien is that like he let that project get too far away from him. He let a lot of other people come in and mess with that. But I've always seen like, and when you hear about Ridley Scott talk, it sounds like he's a guy you just gotta let him be bossy and be difficult, because it typically pays off. So like with Alien, he was like, no, I want the space jockey in this movie. I'm putting it in the movie. They're like, no. So Ridley Scott went and he drew the entire storyboard for the movie himself. He like he just goes and he's like, I'm going to do my own story, because Ridley Scott, he's actually an artist. Like I think he went to some sort of art school. So he goes and he does the storyboard, brings it, and he's like, hey, look, this is what I'm trying to do. And once they saw his vision actually somewhat visualized in storyboard form, they were like, oh man, okay, we'll give you the money. And so like he got what he wanted, because like he proved that his vision was worthwhile and worth that extra cash. So that's an awesome story of like the time when the studio was like, okay, come on, be reasonable now. And Ridley Scott was just like, nope, I'm not going to be reasonable. I'm going to be difficult, and I'm going to be a pain.
Speaking of studio interference, this is a film I've never seen, but it is Ridley Scott, The Kingdom of Heaven.
I've never seen that movie either.
His original director's cut was 3 hours long, and it's a film about the Crusades, starring Orlando Bloom. And it was mid-2000s, I believe. I want to say 2003 or 2005. Just watched, I'm totally wrong, and it's like 2008 or something. But that movie was chopped down to 90 minutes in its theatrical run. Like, half of that movie was cut down. And that movie got very bad reviews. And then when they released the director's cut Blu-ray, everyone was like, wow, that was a great movie. And that's another thing where it's like, yeah, I think Ridley Scott is a pretty hard person to work with. Like, just listening to him talk, like, he's a great mind and a great director, and he knows it.
Yeah.
But he's also a really hard worker, so he kind of earns that attitude.
Yeah.
Even if some of his movies that he's made are very, very bad. But, I mean, when I watched, like, Blade Runner, going back to him making his own storyboards, on the set of Blade Runner, they called them Ridleygrams. And you can actually view some of them. I know I have the Blade Runner 30th Anniversary Collector's Edition Blu-ray set, and you can just view like all of his little drawings. They're pretty cool.
That's really cool. Like, I don't know, Ridley Scott, like I said, but he's earned that like right to be like arrogant in a way. But it's strange because he's really humble about the movies that people say are great.
Yeah.
Like he's like, oh, here's this film, like in one time, like he has this like I don't know what it's called whenever like a director does like a little like, I don't know, confessional about the movie before the movie begins, but like that happens, that's on like certain Alien versions of Alien. When you watch it, you'll like
an introduction.
What?
Like an introduction?
Yeah. No, yeah. I don't know why I couldn't think of that word, but he sits down in front of the camera and he's like, oh yeah, this film Alien, I guess a lot of people, they say they like it, I guess it's pretty good. And he's really humble about it, but the other thing is like he's horrible about criticism. Like that's the other thing people say is that like Ridley Scott very rarely can like, he's not very good at taking negative feedback with his movies. So I get it. But like, that's a strange thing because I think recently something had to happen to Ridley Scott recently where he had like an epiphany and he's changed now, because if you watch him talk about Prometheus in interviews for when The Martian was being promoted, he's so different now. And like just in the most recent interviews he's given, he's like, oh yeah, I just let the film get too far away. He's actually like critical of himself. And like, that's something you didn't see a whole lot before, like The Martian, really. So yeah, that's really cool. Like, I don't know. I'm really excited for Alien Covenant, regardless of any sort of hesitations people have after Prometheus. But like, I mean, he just made The Martian. It's undeniable that Ridley Scott still has whatever it is that makes him so great.
Yeah. I love Ridley Scott, but I've only heard one of his commentaries. It was for the final cut of Blade Runner. That guy sucks at commentaries. It's like he showed up to work one day, like at his office, and somebody was like, "Hey, we need you to do a commentary for Blade Runner." Oh, let's just put it on. I'll talk for a couple of hours.
Random life stuff. Nothing to do with the movie.
It's like he's not even giving you like anecdotes about the set of the movie. He kind of is, but he's just kind of like, "Oh yeah, I like this scene. It's really cool. Oh, I like this scene. It's a good scene too."
Yeah, so he's like, Zack Snyder must have learned how to do commentaries from Ridley Scott.
Or Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston's commentary on Ben-Hur is hilarious because everything is very good. Very good. Yeah.
It's great.
Because like he's talking like, "Oh yeah, this is I'm trying to Haya Hararit. She was a very good actress, inexperienced, but she was very good. And William Wyler was the director, and he was good. He was a very good director. Like everything's just very good according to Charlton Heston."
I don't know if you've seen have you seen the movie Armageddon?
I have not.
Okay, so the Michael Bay movie Armageddon. Ben Affleck's in the movie. Ben Affleck I think Ben Affleck did his own commentary of that film. And it's hilarious because he's just like so like condescendingly making fun of it while watching it. So like there's like this, so pretty much the premise of the movie, asteroids flying to Earth. So the only way to destroy the asteroid is to drill into its core and like detonate a bomb from within the asteroid. So they get a team of like oil drillers.
You mean they couldn't just get NASA people to operate heavy drilling machinery?
No, yeah, but they get, yeah, and it's like Ben Affleck is talking, he's like, I once asked Michael while we were on the set why NASA would get oil drillers and teach them how to be astronauts instead of just getting astronauts and teaching them how to be oil drillers. And it's like, it's so funny because like he's just ripping the movie apart. It's so funny. Anyway, this has nothing to do with studio interference at this point.
You're so off the beaten path by now. Anything else you wanted to say about studio interference?
Here's just one thing I'll bring up. So I don't know if anyone's ever seen the show Project Greenlight. I know I've talked to you about it before, right?
Yeah, you have.
Okay, so Project Greenlight is really cool because you get to see what it's like because those movies, they're made like, so like pretty much as a show, you go on there, they get a director, and HBO goes, here's $3 million to make a movie. And it's essentially, they help a no-name, no-one director who's only worked on his own little private individual, like personal short films and stuff like that. And they give them the money to do like that's fairly, $3 million is like, it's low budget by studio standards. So they're like, here you go. And, the most recent season of it, they had this guy named Jason, and he was incredibly hard to work with. He was like the most like, I don't know. I don't know. He didn't seem like, he's kind of the guy that like a no studio would ever want to work with because he was making a lot of demands, but he's like a nobody. So it was like, I don't know. It's just kind of crazy that he was like so ballsy in what he was asking for. And so at one point he was like, I want to shoot this on film. Like I actually want to shoot this movie on film. And HBO was like, I mean, if you shoot on film, you'll have less days to film because we won't be able to afford some of the crew for the amount of time that you would preferably want to shoot the whole film. And they're also like, it's also more expensive. We can't shoot on film. And so he's like, "Urgh." So on the show, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, they're kind of like, they I don't know really what they're producers on the film itself. I think they put up some of the money that goes towards, the actual film itself. So, they're producers, they're kind of like hosts of the show, and they're also there to like be like a teacher to this new incoming director if they want to like give any advice, or they can go to Ben Affleck and Matt Damon for advice on like, I don't know, any experience advice and stuff like that. So Jason goes to Ben Affleck and he's like, I want to shoot on film, but they're saying there's not enough money to shoot on film, blah, blah, blah. And then Ben Affleck's like, oh, okay. And Ben Affleck does one of the coolest things ever, and he goes and talks to Matt Damon, and then he's like, hey, Matt, we need, like, $3 million extra dollars to shoot on film. I don't know if it was actually $3 million extra dollars, but, like, I think it was. It literally, how it played out was, for some reason, Ben Affleck was like, we need more money because Jason wants to shoot the movie on film. And so he's like, okay. And then Ben Affleck comes back to Jason, he's like, okay, so I put up like $1 million, or no, it was like they needed $3 million. He says, Jason, I told HBO that I'd put up $1.5 million, and I, on behalf of Matt, said that he would too. And he's like, but Matt at the time hadn't, like, said that he would. And so he's just like, I told them that Matt would put up the other 1.5. And then, did I say billion earlier? Because I meant million. I don't think I said billion, but I meant million. Billion. So he's like, so I told him that we would put up each 1.5 if that we could shoot on film and have the extra days we needed. And then HBO was like, oh, we're not going to make Ben Affleck and Matt Damon pay $1.5 million each to just shoot on film. Fine, we'll cave in. And so, like, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, it was just awesome because they, like, were just, like, tag teamed, like, HBO, we're going to strong arm you into giving this guy what he wants. It's just really cool. Fight the man. Fight the power.
Fight the power.
Yeah. It's my last. And that wasn't really that was almost studio interference in a way. But it was like, they stopped it because he's Batman and Jason Bourne.
Yeah. You can't really, defend yourself from Batman and Jason Bourne.
Yeah, no, you're done. You're done, man.
You can't really defend yourself against either of them by themselves.
Yeah.
But when they're together, it's, yeah. I like how you got to the end of that and you said, well, it was almost studio interference.
It could have been, but it wasn't.
That was one of the best Shaggy Dog jokes I've heard in a while. Because like I'm sitting here like, oh yeah, when's the studio? Oh, it was almost. Great stuff. That's all I really have to say, unless you have anything more.
No, yeah, I think that's it. So, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you guys like this. This was kind of rambly, but I kind of like the rambliness of these. We'll probably get more rambly as we go along, actually, with some of these.
Yeah, no, I like it. It helps us touch on other subjects, and it branches out our discussion.
Yeah. All right, so everybody, thank you for watching the newest episode of Socratic Circle Cinema. See you next time.